The gavel struck, a sound like thunder cracking through decades of silence. Eleanor Grayson, 90 years old, sat in the courtroom, her frail hands folded calmly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the judge with a smile that seemed to defy the weight of the moment. The room held its breath, waiting for the verdict that would unravel a story buried for nearly a lifetime. Eleanor's smile wasn't one of defiance or fear, it was something deeper, a quiet triumph carved from years of secrets and sacrifice. The courtroom, with its polished wood and stern faces, felt like a stage where her life's final act was playing out. She had waited for this day, not with dread, but with a strange peace, as if the truth she'd guarded for so long was finally ready to breathe. 60 years ago, Eleanor had been a young woman in a small coastal town, her days filled with the salt of the sea and the dreams of a life beyond the horizon. She was 30 then, vibrant and fearless, working as a nurse in a hospital that served fishermen and factory workers. Her hands, now wrinkled and trembling, had once been steady, stitching wounds and soothing fevers. But it was in that hospital, in 1965, that her life took a turn she could never have foreseen. She met Clara, a girl of 18, brought in half-conscious after a brutal attack. Clara's eyes, wide with fear, locked onto Eleanor's as she whispered a name. Thomas Reed, the town's golden boy, son of the mayor, untouchable. Eleanor held Clara's hand through the night, listening to her broken story of betrayal and violence. The police dismissed Clara's claims. The town turned its back. Thomas walked free, his charm and family name shielding him. Clara, broken and shamed, vanished from the town, leaving behind only whispers. Eleanor couldn't let it go. The injustice burned in her, a fire that refused to die. She began to watch Thomas, noting his habits, his arrogance, the way he moved through the world as if it owed him everything. She wasn't a detective, just a nurse with a conscience that wouldn't quiet. Over months, she gathered evidence letters, photographs, testimonies from others who feared speaking out. She hid them in a locked box beneath her floorboards, promising herself that one day, justice would come. But life moved on. Eleanor married, raised a daughter, and buried a husband. The box remained hidden, its contents a secret she carried alone. Thomas rose to power, becoming a state senator, his past buried under wealth and influence. Eleanor's resolve never wavered, but time dulled her hope. The world seemed content to forget Clara, and Eleanor wondered if she, too, should let go. Then, in her 80s, a chance encounter changed everything. At a local fair, Eleanor overheard a young journalist, Mia, talking about cold cases. Mia's passion reminded Eleanor of her younger self, and something stirred. She invited Mia to her home, showed her the box, and told her Clara's story. Mia, hungry for truth, dug deeper, uncovering new evidence. A witness, now elderly, who had seen Thomas that night, and a forgotten police report buried in archives. Together, they built a case, brick by brick, until it was strong enough to stand in court. Now, at 90, Eleanor sat in the courtroom, her heart steady despite the years. The judge's voice echoed, reading the charges against Thomas Reed, now 78, his once charming face lined with fear. The prosecution had presented Eleanor's evidence, Mia's research, and the testimony of others who had found courage in Eleanor's resolve. The room was a gallery of faces, some skeptical, some hopeful, all waiting. As the judge paused, Eleanor's thoughts drifted to Clara. She had never found her, despite years of searching. Was she still alive? Had she found peace? Eleanor's smile grew softer, not for the verdict, but for the girl she'd fought for all these years. She had kept her promise. The twist came unexpectedly, like a gust of wind through an open window. A woman in her late 60s stood up in the back of the courtroom, her face pale but resolute. "I'm Clara's daughter," she said, her voice trembling but clear. The room froze. She hadn't known her mother's story until Mia's articles began circulating, stirring memories of a childhood marked by her mother's silence and pain. She had come to thank Eleanor, to stand with her, to see justice done. Eleanor's eyes welled up, not with sorrow, but with a joy she hadn't expected. The daughter's presence was a bridge to Clara, a sign that her fight had rippled through time. The judge resumed, his voice steady, but Eleanor barely heard him. She was seeing Clara's face again, those frightened eyes now softened by the thought of her daughter's strength. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Clara's daughter, Sarah, took her seat. Eleanor's heart pounded, not from the trial's tension, but from the sudden weight of connection. Sarah's presence was a living echo of Clara, a reminder that the past was never truly night lived in the people it touched. The judge's voice cut through the murmur, calling for order. He began reading the verdict, each word deliberate, like stones dropping into a still pond. Eleanor's smile remained, a quiet defiance against the years of doubt. She glanced at Sarah, whose eyes were fixed on the judge, her hands clasped tightly. Eleanor wondered what Clara had told her daughter, what fragments of truth had survived the decades. Flashback to 1966, a year after Clara's disappearance. Eleanor had stood at the edge of the town's pier, staring at the gray sea, her heart heavy with failure. She had tried to find Clara, writing letters to neighboring towns, asking questions that met only silence. The locked box under her floorboards grew heavier with each piece of evidence she added. But without Clara, it felt like chasing shadows. She had almost given up then, her resolve fraying under the weight of a world that didn't care. But a letter arrived one rainy afternoon, and signed, postmarked from a city 200 miles away. It was brief, written in a shaky hand. "Thank you for believing me. I'm safe now. Don't look for me." Eleanor knew it was Clara. The letter was a lifeline, proof that her fight wasn't in vain. She kept it with the box, a talisman of hope, and vowed to wait for the right moment to act. Back in the courtroom, the judge's voice grew sharper, detailing Thomas Reed's crimes. The evidence was damning. Eleanor's photographs of Thomas's car near the crime scene, the witness who had seen him fleeing, and Mia's discovery of a second victim who had come forward after decades of silence. Thomas's defense crumbled, his lawyer's arguments unraveling against the weight of truth. Sarah's presence added a new layer to the trial. She testified, her voice steady despite the tears. She spoke of her mother's life after leaving the town, how Clara had rebuilt herself, married, and raised Sarah in a quiet city, but never spoke of her past. It was only after Clara's death, 10 years ago, that Sarah found a diary hidden in her mother's attic, filled with cryptic references to a night of violence and a nurse who had been her only ally. Sarah had come to the trial to honor her mother, to see the man who had broken her brought to justice. Eleanor listened, her heart swelling with pride and sorrow. She had never known Clara's fate, but Sarah's words painted a picture of resilience, of a woman who had survived despite the world's cruelty. Eleanor's smile deepened, not for herself, but for the legacy of strength she had helped preserve. The twist deepened when Mia, the journalist, revealed a new piece of evidence. She had found a retired police officer, now in his 80s, who had worked the original case. He admitted, under oath, that he had been pressured by Thomas's father to bury Clara's report. His testimony, given with a trembling voice and tearful regret, was a bombshell, shifting the courtroom's mood from tense to electric. The crowd murmured, the judge's gavel struck again, and Thomas's face drained of color. Eleanor felt a pang of vindication, but also pity. The officer's confession was a reminder that systems, not just men, had failed Clara. She thought of her own silence, the years she had waited, wondering if she could have done more. But Sarah's hand reached for hers, a gentle squeeze that pulled her back to the present. "You did enough," Sarah whispered, her eyes shining with gratitude. The judge's verdict was nearing its end, the words, "guilty," hanging in the air like a promise kept. Eleanor's smile held steady, a beacon in the storm of emotions. She had carried Clara's truth for 60 years, and now it was free. The word "guilty" landed like a stone in Eleanor's heart, not heavy but grounding, a weight that anchored her to this moment. She exhaled, her smile unwavering, as the courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. Sarah's hand tightened around hers, a silent vow that they had won something greater than revenge truth. The judge continued, detailing the sentence. Thomas Reed would spend his remaining years in prison, stripped of the power that had shielded him for decades. Eleanor's eyes drifted to Thomas, now a frail figure slumped in his chair, his once proud demeanor shattered. She felt no joy in his fall, only a quiet resolve that justice, though delayed, had arrived. Her mind wandered back to the 1970s, when she had raised her daughter, Lily, in the same town that had failed Clara. Eleanor had taught Lily to question, to fight, to never let silence win. She wondered if Lily, now living across the country, would understand why her mother had kept this secret for so long. Eleanor had wanted to protect her, to keep the ugliness of the world at bay, but now she wished she had shared more. Perhaps Lily would have joined her fight. In the courtroom, the mood shifted as the judge allowed final statements. Sarah stood again, her voice stronger now. She spoke of her mother's resilience, how Clara had taught her to find beauty in small things: a sunrise, a kind word, a stranger's belief in her. Eleanor was that stranger, Sarah said, her eyes locking onto Eleanor's. She gave my mother a reason to keep going, and she gave me a reason to be here today. The words pierced Eleanor, stirring a memory of a night in 1985. She had been cleaning out her attic when she found the locked box, its contents untouched for years. She sat on the floor, rereading Clara's letter, her resolve reigniting. She began writing letters to lawyers, to journalists, anyone who might listen, but the responses were always the same. Too old, too hard to prove, too late. She had almost given up again, but Sarah's words now reminded her why she hadn't. The twist came softly, like a shadow moving across the room. A man in his 50s approached the stand, his face weathered but kind. He introduced himself as Daniel, Clara's son, Sarah's older brother. He had been estranged from the family, living abroad, unaware of the trial until Mia's articles reached him. He spoke of finding a letter from his mother after her death, one that mentioned a nurse who had saved her spirit. Daniel had come to meet Eleanor, to thank her for giving his mother the strength to raise him. Eleanor's smile faltered, not from doubt, but from the overwhelming weight of connection. She had never imagined Clara's life beyond that hospital room, but now, her children stood before her, living proof that her fight had mattered. Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke of his mother's love, her quiet strength, and the way she had always spoken of a kind nurse who had believed her when no one else did. The courtroom was silent, the weight of Daniel's words settling over everyone. Even the judge seemed moved, his stern face softening. Eleanor felt a tear slip down her cheek, not for herself, but for Clara, whose legacy was now a chorus of voices speaking her truth. She glanced at Mia, who nodded, her eyes bright with pride. They had done this together, a chain of belief stretching across generations. As the session ended, Eleanor stood, her frail frame steady with purpose. She walked toward Sarah and Daniel, their faces a mirror of Clara's resilience. They embraced, a quiet moment that felt like a homecoming. The courtroom began to empty, but Eleanor lingered, her smile a beacon of peace. She had carried Clara's story for so long, and now it belonged to the world. Eleanor stepped out of the courtroom into the crisp autumn air, her cane tapping softly against the stone steps. The world felt different now, lighter, as if the truth she had carried for 60 years had finally taken flight. Sarah and Daniel walked beside her, their presence a quiet strength that warmed her more than the sun ever could. The trial was over, but its echoes lingered. Reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing, but Eleanor's smile remained steady, untouched by the chaos. She had no words for them. Her story was in the verdict, in the faces of Clara's children, in the box that no longer needed to be hidden. Mia joined them, her notebook tucked away, her role as journalist now secondary to her bond with Eleanor. Flashback to 1995, when Eleanor had sat at her kitchen table, the locked box opened before her. She was 60 then, her hair beginning to gray, her hands still steady but her heart heavy with doubt. She had tried again to bring Clara's case to light, contacting a new generation of lawyers, but the response was always the same. Too much time had passed. She wrote to Clara's last known address, hoping for a reply, but the letter came back unopened. That night, she cried, wondering if her fight had been for nothing. But now, at 90, Eleanor knew it hadn't. The verdict was more than a legal triumph. It was a testament to the power of holding on, of believing when no one else did. She thought of Clara, imagining her watching from somewhere beyond, her spirit at peace. Eleanor's smile grew, a quiet promise that she had kept her word. The final twist came as they reached the courthouse steps. A young girl, no older than 16, approached, her eyes wide with awe. She introduced herself as Lily's daughter, Eleanor's granddaughter, who had flown in from across the country after reading about the trial. Lily had told her about Eleanor's strength, her quiet fight for justice, and the girl had come to meet the grandmother she had only known through stories. Eleanor's heart skipped, her smile trembling with joy. She hadn't seen Lily in years, their bond strained by distance and time. But this girl, with Lily's eyes and Clara's courage, was a bridge between past and present. She hugged Eleanor tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Grandma." Eleanor held her close, feeling the weight of generations in her arms. They walked to a nearby park, sitting on a bench beneath a canopy of golden leaves. Sarah and Daniel shared stories of Clara, her love for gardening, her quiet humor, her strength in the face of pain. Mia spoke of her plans to write a book, not just about the trial, but about Eleanor's life, a story of resilience that deserved to be told. Eleanor's granddaughter listened, her eyes bright with questions, already dreaming of a future shaped by her grandmother's courage. As the sun set, Eleanor looked at the faces around her, Clara's children, her granddaughter, Mia. They were her legacy, not of blood, but of belief. She had sat in that courtroom at 90, smiling, not because she had won, but because she had fought. The verdict was a victory, but the true triumph was the lives touched, the truths spoken, the silences broken. Eleanor closed her eyes, her smile soft and eternal. She had carried Clara's story to this moment, and now it would carry on without her. The world was listening, and that was enough.